experience. The other member is confused by his statement, so he explains that he's seen someone with a low level, who had surprising repairing and production abilities in the past. He reveals that the player's name is Gurion, and the other member immediately realizes that he's talking about the server's rank 1 player. Dylan confirms it, adding that Gurion is the greatest master, whose single pieces can be traded for millions. Hearing this, the member on the other line decides to go along with Dylan's plan, agreeing to wait for the results before jumping to any conclusions. The man points out that he noticed Dylan returning most of the gold, which was meant to be given to the blacksmith as a signing bonus. He wonders what could have gone wrong with the negotiation, so Dylan explains that Zig wanted something else as compensation. As a result of agreeing to that agreement, he took away 90% of the gold. Of course, the other member is curious as to what else Zig could want in place of so much gold. We find out that the thing that was so important to him was a spot on the exploration group's acceptance list. Along with many other players, the blacksmith goes to the board where the list has been pasted, anxious to see if his name is on it. Words may not be able to describe his joy when he sees his name boldly written on the list, and he feels ecstatic when he realizes that he was chosen. Even though he was strapped for time, he can't deny the fact that a large-scale guild is impressive. Not to mention that he was also given 10,000 gold as a signing bonus regardless. Zig thinks about the massive rewards he was given just for joining the Gold Rush Guild, and starts to fear that Dylan might want to start making strange requests when they start working together. The thought makes him uncomfortable, but he manages to shake it off. And instead of bothering himself with such theories, he decides that he should just go and prepare for the quest. The scene shifts once more, and we're taken to a place called Joe's Bakery, which is located on the east side of Baldwin Square. There, my satanic contract triggers once again, and we finally get to see our favorite Giga Chad, Guilford of the Storm. We already know that he's the leader of the Red Tiger Company, one of the strongest mercenary groups in Arpedia. We also know that he's the 45th ranked user in the game, but what we didn't know is that right now, he's standing in line at the bakery, waiting for his turn like a good Samaritan. Even though Guilford is a high ranker in the game, he's not arrogant or cocky at all. Truly, we need more people like him in the world. He's just a simple guy who knows when to be polite, and also when to fight like a fierce warrior. Soon, it's finally Guilford's turn at the bakery, but when he reaches the counter, all of the biscuits he wanted are sold out. My guy is both shocked and horrified, because such a thing has never happened to him before. And this is when the woman at the counter explains that another guest purchased all of them earlier. Guilford gets enraged when he sees the guest leaving the bakery, with a tall stack of biscuit that he was supposed to purchase. The mercenary confronts him and grabs his shirt, pointing out that he shouldn't be so greedy when his inventory is already full. Of course, when the biscuit hoarder turns around, we see that it's none other than our boy Zig. He's already munching on the biscuits, and unfortunately for him, we're not the only ones who recognize him, because Guilford of the Storm also remembers that he was the shitty blacksmith who destroyed his favorite sword and escaped. Before Zig can even think, Guilford grabs his shirt from behind and pulls him back to confirm that he's the bastard blacksmith. Seeing how angry he is, our hero is terrified and even starts sweating. But rather than running away or anything like that, he decides to try and outsmart the red-eyed warrior. With the pile of biscuits in his hands, he pretends that he doesn't recognize Guilford and asks him who he is. Seeing that Zig is trying to play dumb with him, Guilford snaps, and you can actually see the thread of reasoning break above his head. At this point, it almost looks like he's about to tear our hero into a million pieces. His eyes start glowing brightly as a result, and he tries to hit the blacksmith for some payback. By some miracle, Zig manages to dodge a few of the hits, but eventually, it looks like Guilford is going to get him anyway. However, before the big guy can land the life-ending blow on the blacksmith, he disappears into thin air. Zig almost can't believe his eyes, because he knew he was almost killed a few seconds ago. And that's when a tab pops up, informing him that Guilford has logged out of the game. As you'd expect, my guy is quite confused, because he doesn't know why Guilford would log out when he had already caught him. The fighters of the Red Tiger Company who were watching the altercation are also just as shocked and confused as Zig, because they can't understand why their leader would leave so abruptly. The scene cuts to the real world, and we see Guilford in his normal life. Surprisingly, he looks a lot like his avatar in the game, with the only major difference being the color of his eyes. At the time we see him, those eyes are tearing up, because he's currently being scolded by his wife, who's berating him and accusing him of being all talk and no action. It turns out that he promised to help out with the dishes, while his wife went out shopping for groceries. But instead of doing any of that, my man was wasting his time in the fantasy game of Arpedia. Guilford admits that he's at fault, but tries to argue that she shouldn't have pulled out the plug on his capsule. However, before he can even finish talking, his dear wife snaps at him and proceeds to teach him a lesson. We don't see what she does to him next, but from the screams coming from the room, it's pretty obvious she's bending his body parts in ways that shouldn't be possible. He begs her not to dislocate his elbow, and for a brief moment, she actually lets go before suddenly moving to his legs to continue from there. Guilford continues to scream and beg his wife for mercy, but I'm pretty sure that's out of the question. While this wrestling couple continues their little scuffle, we see their daughter studying in the next room. She has a bow and arrow hung on her wall, and even trophies which she probably won in archery competitions. The young lady calls out to her screaming father and reminds him that she told him to be quiet so she can study. Guilford hears her and agrees to hold out for one more week, because by then, her exams will be over. Pretty sure we all know where this is going by now. This lady trying to study is actually the archer girl from the game. And holy fuck, my man Guilford actually turns out to be her father. Anyway, the scene shifts back to the game, and we see different players arriving at the Barca's Castle Gate Exploration Team meeting point. The different teams arrive with their weapons and supplies in carts. While the players there wait, some of them suddenly notice someone coming. It's Sir Guilford of the Storm and the Red Tiger Company, and the men are surprised that they also came for the quest. They're even more surprised that Guilford showed up, and as such, they finally confirm that the rumors of him participating are true. For that to be the case, they believe that the quest must really be extremely lucrative. While those guys are gossiping, Guilford suddenly calls out to his men and orders them to search the area thoroughly for someone. Pretty sure you already know who he's looking for. That's right, he's looking for Zig. Guilford has a feeling that our hero will also be participating in the special quest, because he saw how many of the biscuits he ordered. Well, his hunch is actually very correct, because Zig is at the meeting point as well. While he waits for the quest to begin, he hears a woman announcing that she sells items necessary for the quest for cheap. Zig goes to check out her stuff, and she quickly identifies him as a blacksmith, and after doing so, she proceeds to pitch him her products. The woman asks him if he's ever found himself in a situation where he was ambushed by a monster on his way somewhere. Well, they're in a fantasy game with many monsters, so before Zig can respond, she concludes that he has definitely been in such situations before. As such, she proceeds to tell him that she's thought about such situations as well, and decided that it would be good for production skill players to have at least one survival skill. She tries her best to make the conversation engaging, and even though Zig seems nervous and skeptical, he answers her each time, confirming her obvious assumptions. At this point, our hero feels like she might be a peddler and starts thinking of a way to get away from her and go somewhere else. But before he can escape, the woman reveals the item she wants to sell, claiming it to be a recommended purchase for such situations. The item turns out to be a teleportation ring, and it costs a whopping 10,000 gold. It may sound like an absurd amount at first, but our hero feels that it's actually pretty cheap. To him, it's a mouth-watering offer because a teleportation ring isn't supposed to be that cheap. But even though it's a low price for such a rare item, Zig admits that 10,000 gold is still a lot of money for someone like him. And so, he decides that he needs to think carefully before making the purchase. Strangely, Zig unconsciously drops a bag of gold on the merchant's table and is shocked when he realizes that his body reacted before he could even think about it. The merchant lets go of the ring after he pays, and as Zig walks away with his new item, she thanks him for his purchase and wishes him luck on the quest. My guy doesn't even mind spending so much money on the ring, because he feels that it's so valuable that he could resell it and even make more money. Feeling satisfied with the purchase, he decides to check out the ring and is immediately horrified at what he discovers. A tab pops up, informing him that the ring is imbued with the power of teleportation. The ring teleports the user 20 meters in the chosen direction as it's supposed to, but it will immediately be destroyed after a single use. In other words, my boy Zig has pretty much been scammed. Meanwhile, we see the merchant packing up the rest of her goods and earnings for the day. As she mounts them in her wagon, she mentions how the day's sales were hefty just as she expected. Balden Town is full of pushovers who don't know anything, and it's very easy for her to sell counterfeits to them and scam them of their money. Before she can leave though, Zig returns to confront her about her scam. He marches toward her angrily, calling her a con artist and demanding that she return his money back. He yells in rage and challenges her, but she just pretends not to know him and even calls him a beggar. Zig doesn't have the patience for her shenanigans, so he warns her not to pretend and asks her to take a look at the ring she sold to him. He's so pissed that he starts making a scene, so the merchant asks him what the problem is. She points out that the ring has the ability to teleport, trying to justify her sale. Of course, our hero snaps at her, because moving 20 meters after a 4-second delay for a single time only can only be described as a scam. When he calls her a con artist again, the woman snaps back, asking him to address her by her name, which is Legas. Zig decides to be witty and changes the name to Allegas, suggesting that it's the perfect username for a con artist who partakes in illegal traits. It doesn't take long before the heated exchange turns physical, and before both of these idiots can hurt each other, one of the guards arrives and asks them what's going on. He informs the both of them that the players will be departing soon as planned. Zig tries to report the merchant to the soldier by revealing that she scammed him, but before he can say anything, she pushes him to the floor and wraps herself around the soldier's arm. While discreetly placing a bag of gold in his hand, she tells him that she was running her legitimate business when Zig came onto her and started making trouble. After receiving his bribe from behind, the soldier switches up on Zig. He points his spear at the boy and calls him a criminal scum for trying to frame an innocent lady. Zig is confused and annoyed that the soldier would think Legas is innocent. He tries to explain what really happened, but the corrupt soldier doesn't want to hear any of it. He shuts up our boy and orders him to quickly apologize to the respectable lady. On top of that, the soldier claims that Zig will have to push her heavy cart for her as punishment for his offense. Our hero realizes that he can't really fight back this injustice when the soldier threatens to remove him from the exploration team if he disobeys. While Zig is horrified and depressed by this terrible threat, the level 55 merchant/con artist is just chuckling mischievously on the side. A while later, we see our hero pushing Legas' cart while she sits on top with her goods and money. Not so surprisingly, Zig is crying while pushing the cart because he's been reduced to the level of a donkey. Meanwhile, Guilford is still keeping his eyes peeled for the blacksmith who destroyed his precious sword. Behind one of the trees in the bushes, we see a hooded man with an eagle on his arm. He places a rolled-up paper in the compartment strapped to the eagle's leg, and afterward, sends the eagle to deliver his message. The eagle flies swiftly and reaches the Broaden Kingdom's treasury in no time. When the bird delivers the message, it stays on the window while the receiver talks with someone, admitting that the event they were worried about has finally occurred. While burning the paper, the man reveals that the so-called dreaded event is the fact that the Barca's kingdom has sent off an exploration team. This new development makes things difficult for him, because half of his country's finances come from intermediary trade. However, because they are in friendly relations with the Barca's kingdom, they can't openly try to restrain them from establishing a new trade route. The old man who's been speaking so far asks the other man in the room if he understands what he means. An ominous smile appears on the hooded person's face, and he assures the old man that he understands him very well. This man's real name is Kira, and he's the 89th ranked player in the game, who also happens to be one of the deadliest assassins in Arpedia. Meanwhile, back in the woods, we see an exhausted Zig lying on the floor and wondering how his situation got this bad. Even though he looks like he's about to pass out, Legas doesn't seem to care. She addresses him as slave number 1 and orders him to get up so he can set up her tent. Hearing her say such things, Zig just remains on the floor and curses her in his mind. Legas says she needs to log out for a while, so she orders him to set up the tent and go get their food while she returns. Before leaving, she wants to make sure that Zig understands his duty, so she asks him if he's got everything she said. Zig doesn't say anything, so she gets upset and orders him to answer her while calling him a slave. At this point, Zig finally responds by warning her to not push her luck, and asks her if she really takes him for a slave. From the look on his face, it's pretty clear that my man has some horrible plans for this scammer. In the end, Zig snaps and declares that he can't take her mistreatment any longer. But before he can do anything to get his revenge, the annoying con artist calls out for the guards like a damsel in distress. The moment Zig hears this, he quickly turns around and crouches down to inspect the ground and find the best spot for her tent. He continues to murmur while working, and when the scammer sees this, she begins to gloat. She tells him that he should have just behaved from the beginning and expects everything to be set properly before she returns. Finally, she logs out of the game, and while her avatar is still disappearing, Zig begins to shed tears. He thinks about how much crap he's taking from her, just because he can't afford to not participate in this quest. He curses out loudly, but eventually gets to work because that's the best he can do. A while later, he's done with everything as instructed. He's set up the tent, made a fire, and even prepared a suitable meal for them to eat. While he's eating, he wonders why he's suffering so much after getting caught up with a con artist. He's still drowning his sorrow by stuffing himself with food when someone suddenly calls out to him. The owner of the voice drops a damaged dagger in front of Zig and reveals that he heard he's the best person to ask for repairs in Balden. It's times like these that Zig wishes he didn't have such a reputation. He looks up at the guy, and he has some men with him who appear to be a bunch of mercenaries. The guy has a scar on his face, and he's holding a pretty big axe that makes him look threatening. He bluntly tells Zig to fix the broken dagger for him, and the blacksmith recognizes the men as people from the Red Tiger Company. Zig, who just wants to enjoy his meal, asks the scar-faced guy why he needs the repair so urgently. In response, the guy smirks at Zig tauntingly. He claims that he heard Zig is Balden's king of repairs, but admits that the blacksmith doesn't even look like he's confident in his skills. You see, Mr. Scarface over here doesn't actually need the dagger fixed. He plans to nitpick as much as possible, and then drag Zig in front of their leader, who happens to be none other than our new father-in-law, Guilford. After much hesitation, Zig finally gets up and decides to take a look at the damaged equipment. He places his food on the floor and thinks about how annoying it is that he couldn't enjoy his meal in peace. He picks up the damaged dagger and uses his grain skill to start working. A few moments later, Zig hands Scarface the dagger after fixing it. The guy can't believe his eyes, because he didn't actually expect his Twilight dagger to get fixed. What's even more unbelievable is that the dagger is back to 100% durability, just like it was when it was new. To be honest, Scarface and the other men are so baffled by this result that they forget about their plan to take our hero to Guilford. Instead, they all inspect the dagger, trying to make sure that their eyes aren't playing tricks on them. One of them admits that the condition of the dagger is absolutely perfect, and the other points out how the shiny equipment looks just the way the rumors say it should. Scarface is so overjoyed to see his dagger looking brand new that he starts to doubt that Zig is the same guy who destroyed their leader's sword. Meanwhile, Zig, who's lying in a hammock and trying to read 50 Shades of Grey, politely asks them to leave if they don't have anything else for him to fix. He tells them that he's in the middle of reading, and then for some reason, he calls Scarface an old man. The term seems to have really upset the guy, because my dude immediately snaps at our hero for being rude. He begins to rant non-stop, and claims that he's never seen someone act so nonchalantly after destroying someone else's weapon. He finds Zig's behavior very shameless, and is so offended by his statement that he breaks the newly repaired dagger in a fit of rage. Scarface then clears the air about his age, explaining that he's not an old man, but actually someone around the blacksmith's age. Zig appears to be getting on the guy's nerves on purpose, because he calls him an old man once again. But before he can finish his statement, the guy cuts him off and insists that he isn't old. Even if he didn't want to take Zig to Guilford anymore, he's probably changed his mind after receiving such insults. He tells Zig to follow him immediately, and threatens to beat him up if he refuses. It's at this point that Zig realizes what's going on, so he closes the manual and reveals that he remembers these people. He gets down from the hammock and identifies them as the men from the bakery, and once again calls them old out of spite. Scarface continues to insist that he isn't old, but Zig just asks them if they're all still upset because he bought all the biscuits. Hearing this, Scarface is beyond offended. He grabs his axe and prepares to teach Zig a lesson for suggesting that the Red Tiger Company would get mad over something so trivial. Even if Scarface has more serious beef with Zig, the other members of the Red Tiger Company all hide their faces shamefully, because this is definitely the main reason they were searching for our hero. Either way, their motives don't really matter to Zig, because he just happened to be looking for someone to take out his anger. And now, Scarface and his friends have presented him with the perfect opportunity to do so. He points his sword at them and confidently challenges them to come fight him. But for someone with such a big mouth, Zig's fighting skills are incredibly appalling. We see him tied up with a big bump on his head, implying that he was pretty much subdued without putting up a fight. In any case, the men take him to their camp where they present him to Guilford. As the Red Tiger Company surrounds him, Zig tries to argue that ganging up is cheating. But it's not like anyone gives a single fuck. Guilford interrupts his nagging and promises to overlook things and forgive him if he apologizes sincerely. But of course, instead of taking the wise decision, Zig proves stubborn once more and insists that he did nothing wrong. He claims that he waited in line for his turn and paid for the biscuits, so what's there for him to apologize for? On top of that, he curses at Guilford, but the leader calmly explains that he's not even talking about the biscuits. Zig is shocked to hear this, so he asks why they're holding him captive anyway. He claims that ever since he started playing the game, he's never harmed or offended anyone else. Hearing him say this strikes a nerve in Guilford's head, and he's really annoyed that Zig thinks he's actually innocent. He claims that tying the blacksmith up won't be enough, so he orders his men to set him free, confusing our hero on what they're planning. As you'd guess, he wasn't actually set free. Instead, the men are in fact preparing for his execution. Zig suddenly looks into the sky and sees Sir Guilford of the Storm leaping into the air. The scene terrifies our hero, because he's probably about to get divided by two. However, when Guilford slams his weapon on the ground, an explosion follows, and it appears Zig knows what's going on because he's still terrified. An item with just a single point in attack power shouldn't be able to produce so much force, and when the perspective switches to Guilford, we see him holding the item called the Stick of Love. The man then walks menacingly towards Zig, and reveals that he's going to personally teach the blacksmith some manners. After leaping into the air once again, he announces that it's time for some lessons in discipline. The leader of the Red Tiger Company swings the Stick of Love at Zig and generates something that looks like a massive inferno. It blows our hero back, and he struggles to stay on his feet. He finds it strange that Guilford would refer to this as a discipline class, because he knows that the old man just wants to take out his anger on someone else. Before Zig can even think about dodging or running away from the fight, the huge blast from Guilford's stick hits him in the middle of his chest. The dust settles, and we see our hero lying nearly unconscious in a small crater caused by the explosion. Both the Stick of Love and Zig's body are burning with some fresh smoke that gives us an idea of the power behind the attack. Guilford stands over him and reveals that he didn't even put all of his strength into the attack, and he's pretty disappointed that Zig couldn't take the hit standing. Disappointed at the result, the man decides to set a condition for our hero. He promises to let him go free, but only if he's able to touch a single hair on his body during the lesson. Even though he's taken a lot of damage, Zig's big mouth only gets bigger and he starts to get back up while calling Guilford a stubborn boomer. He calls the old man's conditions crap and labels him as a cocky bastard for thinking he can never get hit by a low-level blacksmith. Zig then takes his sword and slowly gets back on his feet, clearly pissed at how much he's being looked down upon. But you see, he has already suffered so much damage that his health is down to just 10 points. Regardless, he gets up and charges at Guilford with his sword. He screams as he runs toward the leader of the Red Tiger Company, but Guilford effortlessly deflects it with the stick of love. Zig doesn't relent and continues to swing his sword at Guilford, but the big guy keeps deflecting all of his attacks. The two keep clashing weapons until Guilford eventually manages to push back our hero. However, Zig is determined to hit him as well, so he manages to stay on his feet despite the overwhelming attacks. Guilford admits that Zig isn't bad for a beginner and even notices that he has a peculiar talent for fighting. However, he still believes that Zig's talent isn't up to the point where he can overcome their difference in levels, especially in a game like Arpedia where your rank is everything. But even with all the odds stacked against him, our hero continues to fight. He charges at Guilford again and leaps into the air until he uses an incredibly powerful attack to destroy the Stick of Love. After Zig surprisingly destroys the Stick of Love, we find out that he achieved this by using the arm break skill, which he learned from Carwin's manual. This special skill allows him to destroy any armaments or ores by simply targeting the gaps existing in the material. The prerequisite to learning this skill is to train one's grain skill up to rank 7, and it appears that today, this is exactly what our hero has done. We see a flashback of when Zig was rudely interrupted from enjoying his meal. It appears that it was the same time he acquired this skill, because just when he was putting his bowl down, a tab popped up and informed him that his grain skill had become rank 7. In addition, he was also able to learn a new skill, the arm breaker. The panel cuts back to the heated fight between Zig and Guilford, and we see the epic scene where our hero leaps into the air and uses all of his might to destroy the Stick of Love. As the item shatters into several pieces, Guilford can't believe his eyes because he doesn't understand how Zig could break his weapon. While the big guy stares in bewilderment, my boy concludes that this is the first time he has seen a skill that can break other players' weapons. After such an awesome display, Zig proceeds to do something both shocking and incredibly weird. He grabs Guilford by the shoulders, and as he leans in, he tells the big guy to get a piece of his mind. Zig plans to execute a powerful headbutt, which he probably thinks will knock Guilford out or something. But his plan goes terribly wrong when the old man slips and tilts too far back. As a result, what was supposed to be a knockout headbutt ended up becoming a very awkward and unexpected kiss on the lips. As the two men lock lips, their eyes widen in horror and disbelief. The other members of the Red Tiger Company have different expressions on their faces as they watch the unbelievable spectacle before them. While Scarface finds the embarrassing mistake amusing, one of his colleagues watches it like a movie. Another one is flustered, and the last guy just barfs a rainbow as a metaphor for what we're all thinking. They're not the only ones taken aback by the scene, because even the animals in the forest gasp upon seeing the two men kiss. As you'd expect, Guilford is outraged that Zig would subject him to such embarrassment, so he yells in anger and vows to kill the blacksmith. While the man expresses his murderous intentions, Zig is still shaken by what the fuck just happened. He's very embarrassed and disappointed that his first kiss was with an old man, and he falls to his knees as the embarrassment washes over him. While he's wallowing in humiliation and exhaustion, the mercenaries of the Red Tiger Company all try their best to hold back their leader from ripping the blacksmith apart. They remind him that he has to keep the promise he made to Zig. But at this point, Guilford doesn't even care about keeping his word. He just wants them to let him go so he can tear